Hello everyone, thank you for tuning in to another one of my tutorial videos. And for this one in particular, we're going to have a little bit of fun today. This particular effect I've seen done quite a few times on different art websites like DeviantArt and Behance and so on, particularly for like advertising campaigns. And when I did a search on YouTube, I came to realize there aren't a lot of tutorials that show you how to do this process, at least not step by step. So hopefully the way that I explain it will help somebody accomplish this goal for their future projects. The model that we're using for this project, she's sitting on a plain black background, and the reason why I chose this photo in particular is because she's facing the camera completely forward. We see both sides of her face evenly, and that will help us achieve this look much more easily. The cat we're going to be using is this lovely leopard that I found on Fotolia, and again, we're using this photograph because the cat is facing completely forward, and that would allow us to mesh the two faces together easily. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our Lasso Tool, and you don't have to be very perfect or accurate with this selection. All you're doing is just taking the face and transporting it over to the other document so it can be broken apart and put back together again. So let's just start selecting past the bridge of the nose, over the head, around. Let's get all those whiskers, which we're going to be using all of them. There we go. Hold down the Shift key to get your little plus sign right next to your lasso tool. If you so happen to miss the chin area, because we're going to be using that as well. I think that looks good. We're going to go over to our Layers menu and add a layer mask. Go over to your arrow or move tool, however you want to call it. We're going to click and hold on our layer and just drag it right on over to our other document. Now my idea is that since she's got this hand in the way, I want to put the cat face over on the other side of her face, on this cheek over here. So I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, Flip Horizontal. And there we go. Now this one we're going to keep as a base layer that we take all the other pieces from. So let's just rename this layer by double clicking on the name. We'll name it Base. And we're going to make a duplicate of this layer that we're going to be using later on. So just right click on it, make a duplicate layer, and let's call this one Face. But the first thing I want to focus on is the eye. So let's hide the base layer, and let's use the face layer as our kind of selection grounds. Let's go to our lasso tool and just select loosely around the eye. It's a bit more than I need, but that'll be fine. Make sure the eye is in the center of your selection. So just click down on the selection, hold, and just move it into position. And I think that looks good. We're going to make another duplicate of our face layer. Right click on the layer and click Duplicate Layer, and we're going to call this one Eye. Hide your face layer by clicking on the little eyeball, and right click on the mask of your eye layer and delete it, because we're not going to use that. We're going to make a new layer mask for this eye layer. Now since I don't want to be messing around with the entire layer for this particular one, I'm going to right click on the layer mask and click Apply Layer Mask, and as you can see, it gets rid of that big bounding box that was affecting the entire image, and now we're just dealing with the eye. So that I can see what I'm actually doing, because right now all I see is cat eye and I can't see what's going on underneath, I'm going to lower the opacity to about 50%, and I'm going to hit Command T or Control T on PCs so that I can just kind of adjust it in here. Let's hit Command or Control minus, plus, I apologize, so we can zoom in and see what we're doing. And one of the reasons why I chose this particular model is because the shape of her eyes already kind of matches the shape of the cat's eyes. And it'll make it a little bit easier to blend it together because they follow the same curvature. You know, the geometry works well together, so it'll look good together once we finish putting it all into one photograph. Let's make the size just slightly smaller. We don't want to make it too small because we do want to keep the proportions of the original cat's face. And I think that looks pretty good. We're going to double click inside the bounding box to get rid of it and set our transformation and bring the opacity back up to 100%. The next step is we're going to add a new layer mask to this particular eye. The reason why I applied the last layer mask is so that we can have just this particular circle to work with. Otherwise, you have to deal with the entire photograph that's hidden by the original layer mask. So let's go to our layer menu and click layer mask. We're going to leave it on white and go to our paintbrush tool. Make sure that we're using black. So, you can always click this little button right here to go to your defaults and click the arrows to switch between foreground and background. We're going to make sure our foreground is black. Go to our brush menus. Make sure the hardness is 0 and the brush size should be relative to what you're doing. Now 180 works for me, but depending on the size of your images and how big the eyes are or what the DPI of your images is, you should make your brush size appropriate for what you're doing. 180 works for me, and I'm going to make sure the opacity is relatively low. It's at 40% right now, and that works perfectly. So we're just going to go around and just erase out this hard edge. What we're essentially doing right now is we're preparing the eye to be blended into the fur that we're going to be adding in underneath it. I apologize, I had something in my eye. And I think that looks pretty good. Make sure we take care of all the hard edges all around the eye. There we go. Now that I can see the eye blended into the face a little bit more, I see that it's just a little bit skewed. It's not quite where I want it to be. So I'm just going to use the move tool to kind of put it into place. We'll hit Command T or Control T on your PC. I think that looks a little bit better. I'm also paying attention to the spacing between the tip of the bridge of the nose and the corner of the eye, and trying to match it up with this corner of the eye right here. And I think that looks all right. We're going to turn on our face layer again. Let's zoom out by hitting Command or Control minus so we can see what we're doing. And now what we're going to pay attention to is the top half of the face. And I say top half, but in reality I'm just acknowledging where the mouth ends and disregarding the chin for right now. What we want to do is worry about the top half of her face, and then we'll deal with the bottom half of her face. Let's go to our Lasso Tool, and using this exact same layer, I'm just going to select all the way around and go right underneath the mouth. Now, one way that we can make sure that we have our same selection as we did before is we can right click on the layer and do intersect mask. And what that does is that it takes into account the selection you just made with the lasso tool and I guess recalculates the layer mask with the selection so that it bounds itself to what you had originally. So now we're going to make a new layer. We're going to duplicate this one. We're going to call it top half. We're going to hide the face layer, delete the layer mask of our top half layer, and click layer mask so that we have a new one. For this particular layer, once again, I'm going to right click on the layer mask just to make it a little bit easier on us. Since we still have layers with the original photograph, we can always go back if we ever screw up or have to restart. Let's right click on the layer mask and click apply layer mask so that now all we have to deal with is just that side of the face. Once again, I have to lower the opacity so that I can see what I'm doing. We're going to hit Command or Control T so we can transform it around. And what I want to do is I want to try and pay attention to the nose. I'm using the nose as the focal point, and I want to try and get that little V shape at the bottom of the cat's nose right on top of her lip. As you can see, you've got that little cat face outline that happens. and we're trying to get it right between her lips. I think that looks about right. I'm going to hold down the command key, which is control on a PC, and take the center of the top of the bounding box and just move it up a little bit. And then the bottom, move that down just a little bit. So it kind of stretches out the face. You have to keep in mind what you're doing is you're not combining, well, in this particular tutorial anyway, my goal is not to make a woman that's half woman, half cat. I want to make half of her face look like it's part cat. So we're trying to pay attention to the boundaries of the shape of her face and then use the cat's face accordingly. So let's double click inside the bounding box to get rid of that. And let's get the opacity back up to 100%. We're going to go down to the bottom of our layers menu, add a layer mask. Once again, go down to our brush, make sure we have it on black, make sure the hardness is 0. And I'm going to bring the size of the brush up just a little bit since I'm working with a larger palette at the moment. Leave the opacity at 40%, and we're just going to blend in now around the woman's head. Now don't worry about the whiskers, that will come in just a moment. Erase them out for right now. Kind of just blend it over here too. Make sure you get rid of all the hard edges. I'm going to lower the opacity of my brush by pressing the number 3 on my keyboard. I think 3 is still too much. Let's bring it down to 2 by pressing the number 2. And that brings it down to 20%. I'm going to right click on the canvas to bring down my brush size. And for this particular project, I'm going to leave the entire cat nose. Kind of blend it in a little bit here. Our goal is to make it look like it was always naturally part of her face. There we go. Looks good. Let's go underneath here. I'm going to make the brush size once again a little bit smaller by right-clicking on the canvas. There we go. Now the reason why, as you can see, I'm going to zoom in with our magnifying tool. The reason why I wanted the cat's mouth to land on her lips is so that we can get the illusion here that the lip has transformed into the cat's mouth. There we go. Let's get rid of these whiskers over here. Let's press X on our keyboard so we can switch between foreground and background color. And I apologize if I'm taking long breaks, but I also want to give people who are watching this tutorial and doing it at the same time a little bit of space, you know, so that they can work and watch at the same time. There we go. I think that looks pretty good for now. Let's zoom back out by pressing Command- on the keyboard. And go to our Move tool. And now we're going to be working with the chin area. Now, we're going to bring back our face layer. We're going to go to our Lasso tool. We're going to select out the chin area. Make sure that you select out above the mouth because we want to have as much surface area as possible. I think I want to select a little bit more. So let's press down on Shift on the keyboard and make the selection slightly bigger. And there we go. I think for this one in particular, we're going to take the easy route since we're ultimately going to be accomplishing the same goal. I'm just going to go to Edit, Copy, Edit, Paste. We're going to hide our face layer and bring our chin over. Hit Command or Control T on your keyboard. We're going to enlarge it just a little bit. Now what I'm holding at the moment on the keyboard is the Shift and Option key. which is Alt on the PC, I believe, yes. So we're going to hold down both of those. The Shift key allows us to keep the proportions, and the Alt key or Option key allows us to resize it in place. If we don't hold down that key, it resizes it from the corner. If we hold it down, it resizes it from the center. So let's just resize it right about there. I'm trying to think of how much I would need to cover her entire chin. Let's stretch it up, stretch it down, holding down the Alt or Option key on your keyboard. I think that's about it right there. Once again, we'll lower the opacity just so that we can see what we're doing. And I think that looks all right. Okay, we're going to add another layer mask. Go to our paintbrush tool. Make sure that the hardness is 0 and that our brush size is appropriate for what we need. Let's zoom in so we can see what we're doing. And once again, we're just blending in. Now, typically, I would likely worry about these little hairs here, but I think I kind of just want to take those out and just blend it into her chin. Right there, right underneath. Make sure that you get rid of all the hard edges around your image. I'm trying to find the happy medium between where I ended the last selection and where her face is now. Let's right click on the canvas to lower our brush size. I'm just going to go around here. Press X to change between foreground and background just so that I can switch between painting and erasing. I apologize for being quiet, but once again, I'm trying to give people who are watching the tutorial time to do this on their own as well while they're watching. I think that looks good. There we go. Let's add in a little bit more. Let's go back to our X key on the keyboard and just bring in a little bit more here. And darken this area. There we go. All right. And now for the final touch. The whiskers. Now the good thing about this cat's particular whiskers is that they're pretty thick, so they'll be easy to paint in and include in this particular project. So let's turn on our face layer. Let's zoom back out so you can see what we're doing here. Go to our move tool. Now what I want to do is I want to select out just this area right here with our lasso tool. Right about there. I think that looks good. We're going to once again just hit edit, copy, edit, paste. Now I'm only doing this to kind of shortcut the process a little bit, but if you're so inclined, if you want to keep everything native and make sure you have originals of everything in all your layers, once again you can just right click and add a layer mask instead of copy pasting. So we're going to hide our face layer once again. We're going to add a layer mask. And now we're just going to move it into place. Now here we need to move the whiskers up to the very tippy top. We're going to rename it whiskers. And I need to lower the opacity so once again I can see what I'm doing. And we're trying to get them as close as possible to what we had before. We may have to do a little rotating, a little relocating, a little stretching here and there. There we go. At the moment, I'm only concerned with the larger whiskers because those are the ones that I'm keeping. There we go. Move it over just a little bit. Perfect. So let's bring our opacity back up to 100. And what we're going to do is we're kind of cheat just a little bit, just a little bit of cheating here. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this layer, duplicate, whiskers, and we're going to name this whiskers screen. Hide the original whiskers layer, go to your whiskers screen layer, and change the blending mode from normal to screen. It automatically helps us to see where the whiskers are going to land and how much we need to keep. So now we're going to go to our original layer here. Turn off the whiskers screen layer. Make sure our brush size is small enough to fit within the whiskers. And all we're paying attention to right now is the section of the whiskers that's above the cat's fur. All this section over here will be taken care of with our screen layer, so you don't have to worry about that. Make sure you're on your screens layer. Bring your brush size down. In my particular case, I had to bring it down to about 7 pixels, maybe even less than that. We're going to go to our quick mask mode, turn that on, and we're going to hold down the shift key so that we can paint in straight lines across these whiskers. Oh, and make sure your opacity is at 100%. I apologize. All right, there we go. And I sped that up so that you wouldn't have to sit there watching me select these out. So what I've done is I've focused only on the parts of the whiskers that are in front of the cat's fur, the part of the section of the neck that the whiskers are in front of. And we're just going to click on our layer mask. We can get our walking ants selection. And we're going to delete this layer mask and add a new one. Now it looks a little strange right now because all we have is these shortened whiskers, but that's where our screen layer comes in. And there we go. Now what we need to do is we need to erase out the parts of the screen layer that we're not going to be using. So we're going to zoom out just a little bit, go to our brush tool, make sure the hardness is 0 and the brush size is appropriate for what you need. Let's make it just a little bit bigger. We're going to erase out this section. Now the reason why I recommended using a screen layer for the tips of the whiskers is because the thicker parts of the whisker, the ones that, near the roots, are much easier to select out with a brush than the tips of the whiskers. The tips of the whiskers, if they're not selected right, they're going to look strange or odd or even fake. So the screen layer allows us to keep the integrity of the ends of the whiskers without having to monkey around with them too much. We can keep the original whiskers and use them to our advantage. Let's make the brush size just a little bit smaller so I can fit into this little area right here. There we go. Clean that up there. Let's zoom in so I can see what I'm doing. There we go. Don't worry so much about this lightened area. That will be taken care of in just a moment. We just want to get rid of the traces of the whiskers that we're not going to be using for this particular project. There we go. Now as you can see, the selection that I had created of the whiskers wasn't enough. I didn't push it far enough, but we can fix that immediately. Let's go back, make sure that we're using white on our paintbrush tool. Bring the size back down to what we were using. I think I had to bring it down to about 5 because it was pretty small, 5 or 6. And we're going to hold down the shift key. Make sure that you're on your layer mask. Even the pros screw up every once in a while. Make sure you're on your layer mask and just paint in the whisker. Now the blending of the selected whiskers and the screened whiskers will be done in just a moment, but what you're doing right now is you're continuing the union between the two layers so that when we're done, it'll be seamless. There we go. All right. Looks good. Now for something like this where it's obvious that it's, you know, it's not quite right, it's not the way the original looked, what we're going to do is make sure we're using black, make sure the hardness is 0, bring our brush size up, and just kind of blend it out. You don't have to change the opacity for that, just make sure that your hardness is 0, and the softened edges of the brush will do the job for you. You're just kind of tapping it. You don't want to go too far. You don't want to erase everything you've already done, as I did there. Just kind of blend out the ends so that they work together. There we go. And now for the final touch, we're going to fix the ends of those whiskers. We're going to go over to our whisker screen layer, and we're going to add a curves layer. We're going to right click on the curves layer and choose create clipping mask. And here you just kind of start selecting out points and start adjusting the layer underneath so that all the space around the whiskers kind of disappears and the whiskers themselves get brightened up. And what it does is having the layer on screen naturally erases out the portions of the image that were much darker, so they kind of just disappear. And it doesn't do it all the way. You don't want to take it too far because you want to still keep, as much of the whiskers as you can. But as you can see, there's a little bit of the layer there that didn't go away completely. So we can just brush around on the layer mask itself and just make sure we've got a good, nice seam here. And I've noticed here on this side of her face, we're kind of missing a bit of texture, so let's bring that in just a little bit more. I believe the layer I need is top half. Let's go to our mask. Make sure our brush size is a little bit smaller to fit that area down there. And our opacity is 100. And just kind of bring in a little bit more. Let's bring our opacity down to 30 for our brush. There we go. That looks a little bit better. Let's remove the little bit of the whiskers that we have here on the bottom half of our chin layer. Just kind of hide them a bit. There we go. There we go. Let's zoom out and see what we've got. I think that looks pretty good. So essentially what we've done is we've taken the two portions of the different species faces and combined them into one. Now, if you're deliberately looking for a woman face and a full-blown tiger face, it makes it a little bit more difficult because you have to keep in mind the tiger's face, you know, the snout is much more pronounced than a human's face. A human has just a little button nose and that's it. But this is a nice way of combining the two so that it still looks like a woman's face and she's kind of, I don't know, going through a transformation. And that's about it. That's the end of the tutorial. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to add them to the comments section. And I hope that you will subscribe and tune in for future videos. I hope you enjoyed the show. And thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.